Welcome to the Reconnected podcast, a home for sharing, understanding, and growth for the retail grocery store industry. During each episode, we will meet an amazing member of our community as we learn about their story and jointly explore the intricacies and challenges of our supply chain. Through it all, we'll remember and honor that everything starts with the real people who spend so much of their lives supporting the retail food supply chain. We will bring together the voices of manufacturers, distributors, and retailers as we journey together to help our industry reconnect. My name is Luke Abbott, and I'm excited to have you join us. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Reconnected podcast, where today I am very honored to be joined by Alex Malamatinas with Melitas Ventures. Welcome.
Thank you, Luke. Great to be here.
Yeah, really, I would say that I have been doing this for the last year, and this is the episode I was most excited about. You are so humble, and yet you've invested in some of the most, I guess, iconic, now mid-sized, fast-growing, even larger brands they've grown into, brands that I really respect. And as part of like my natural healthy eating that I have for my family, like you're on the cutting edge, and grateful you're here to just maybe share some of your journey, to talk about the industry together and dig in.
That's very kind of you to say. It's really a privilege to be working with many of these brands, and excited for the conversation.
I love it. So I know you always get asked, but I'll ask you too. Where did this all start? How did you get to this seed? What were the original seeds that got you going?
Yeah, so it wasn't necessarily a straightforward or sort of conventional path. I guess starting from the beginning, so to speak, I grew up in a CPG household in London. So my father was the CEO of Burger King and Smirnoff in the 90s, Diageo Executive Board, came from a very strong marketing background. And so I was exposed to consumer brands and, particular food and beverage brands from a very young age. In fact, my father's first CEO job, I think, was in the 80s with Pepsi Italy. Wow. And at the time, that's true, it was a true iconic brand at the time. Totally. So I grew up, surrounded by brands, and then ultimately paved my own way. I went to the US for my undergrad at Stanford, began with sort of a traditional finance path, went to Morgan Stanley, went to Wharton for my MBA, and then was essentially trained as an investor in the hedge fund industry in New York. Worked at a Soros fund, Indus Capital, and then a Tiger fund, Tyrion Investments, where I learned how to analyze companies. It was, in particular, the larger publicly traded companies across different sectors and geographies. Mm-hmm. And then long story short, it came full circle where I started to spend, the vast majority of my time on the global consumer companies, the Mondelez, the Nestle's, the Coca-Colas of the world, as a space that I feel that I have an affinity towards and connectivity to, and have always been passionate about working with entrepreneurs, and, noticed that these large companies were and continue to look to the early stage for innovation. So that's when I set up our first fund at Melitas Ventures in 2018.
And was your dad encouraging you to do this, or?
I mean, he was always encouraging me to do whatever I was passionate about. He fortunately, joined us in the early days as an advisor. And so I benefited from his operational expertise as well as others. And I think that's I'm sure we'll get into it, but that's one of the things that's really benefited me. Of course, nobody can do it alone, whether you're building a company or VC fund. And, I think what I brought and bring to the table is my investment experience as well as other things. But ultimately, it was critical for me to partner with experienced operators. And I think that's helped now build the DNA of our firm.
That's not necessarily, it's who, not how, I heard in a book once. Right. Sounds like that makes so much sense. But so you grew up and your dad sounds like he was involved with like very large CPG, like you mentioned Pepsi Italy. And but I understand that you invest more in the natural space. And was there some kind of, was it seeing the opportunity? Was it a lifestyle change you had? Like what led you to this specific space?
Yeah, I think it was both of those things, right? So I think just realizing that these large companies, again, the Monsleys, the Pepsis of the world, have these sort of iconic brands that, but acknowledging that they need to protect those while diversifying gradually to better for you
Mm.
products. And so noticing that that was going to be not just, multi-year, but potentially multi-decade phenomenon set up I think, a great landscape for investment, particularly through sort of VC,
Mm-hmm.
having a long-term sort of perspective on these things. And then, yeah, from the personal side of things, have been increasingly more focused over the years on healthier lifestyle. You are what you eat,
Mm-hmm.
eating healthier products. And I think one of the key sort of realizations for me was that you could have healthier products without needing to sacrifice on the taste.
No sacrifice. I love that.
Yeah.
Because for a while, I mean, when I was growing up, at least we called it crunchy granola, right?
Right.
Like
Exactly.
the organic food
Right.
didn't taste good, but it checked the box of being healthy. And I think that's the big conversion I think we've seen, right? And why it's opened up to the masses and why you see so many
Totally.
natural foods in conventional today in mass, right? And I think you,
100%. Yeah. I mean, it's same with my experience growing up. And, there came a point in time where you could have the same or better tasting products that are
mm,
healthier for you.
right. And so you grew up most of your early years in England or throughout Europe?
Yeah, I was born in Switzerland, in Geneva. I'm half Greek, half Dutch. Lived in a
Okay.
few European
Fun.
countries, but yeah, for my between 10 and 18, I was in London.
Okay. And do you think that growing up in Europe kind of led, or many of your growing up years led to more some of your sensibilities? I always hear like, oh, well, we don't need to put non-GMO Project Verified on our product because we don't do GMOs, or we don't put, I think it's called bio in Europe, or and as opposed to organic. And it's like we don't, like we trust our food system more. Does that, is that right? I didn't grow up there, so I'm curious what the experience is.
On the whole, yes, I would say that's accurate. I also grew up, yeah, in a household, that sort of has Mediterranean
Mm.
influence. So, sort of the meal is,
The blue zone
arguably the
food.
most important, right? The blue zone
Yeah.
food, and it's a way of bonding the family and friends. So it's always been an important part of my life.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And so when you started your fund, I imagine you had an investment thesis. If you're comfortable sharing at least an idea of what that is, and has it evolved as you've grown?
Yeah, well, amazingly, the when we set up the fund in 2018, the core focus was better for you branded products and
Mm-hmm.
continues to be better for you branded products today. So, with all the changes we've witnessed, politically, geopolitically, economically, this theme of moving towards better for you branded products is very much intact.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, it's continued to accelerate throughout the various cycles. You could argue that weight loss drugs and things like that have further catalyzed the
Yeah.
trend. Now people are talking about making America healthy again.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very much a powerful secular theme that just continues. I think the nuance is, we increasingly focus on different maybe categories and subcategories
Yeah.
to find the innovation.
Got it. And you and I have worked together with brands like Abbott and Dose. And as I think about going from like the VFY Better for You general theme to like why you invested, I think Olipop as well, like and many other brands that you've invested in, like how do you choose where to play specifically? I guess without giving away your secret sauce, but like in general, how do you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, at a high level, it's trying to figure out what is a secular
Mm-hmm.
theme or trend rather than something that is a fad.
Okay.
And that's certainly not easy to do, but it
Mm-hmm.
involves conversations with some of the larger strategic corporates in our space. It involves understanding consumer behavior. It involves looking at data, and then being early in these trends, I think can be really powerful, because if you figured out, what's the trend, then you have to go figure out, what are the companies that are going to ride this wave and be there early.
I'm curious in the plant-based kind of alt meat space, like we see now some of the earliest players that raised the most money having some struggles, and then Abbott's, who we're both involved with, is seeming like they were almost like the second wave or third wave of this space. And so maybe it's also the space may have existed, but it's like which wave of the space are you playing in? Does that resonate?
It does. In fact, we looked at many plant-based meat alternatives and couldn't get comfortable with the majority of them, largely for the ingredient profile, and also valuation, right? In sort of 2021,
it was crazy.
It was insane. I mean, many of these businesses were being valued at food tech multiples, but at the end of the day, these are consumer product businesses. And so one of the things that really appealed to us and continues to be lucrative is that, Abbott's has a clean ingredient profile that, by the way, tastes great.
Right.
And so I do think it's part of that next wave of, plant-based, or however we want to label it these days, but, sort of meat alternatives, and consumers are increasingly becoming flexitarian. So, meat is fine. It's not for everybody, but, for many people, it's about sort of meat in moderation. And then what are you going to find as your alternative? And we think Abbott's is right up there.
I agree. And it's interesting how that all played out. If you think about it, I mean, as I think about it, the original larger players, they created products that are almost like a novelty in a way. They bled like meat, or they used the meat juice and things, and it then appealed to. It kind of brought a lot more people under the tent of people willing to eat plant-based foods, and made it even cool. And then there was like this wake up call, like, well, what's in this product? Is this really healthy for me? And so it seems like where you decided to make your bet was like, it was prescient. It was to see like, this probably isn't going to be where the market's going to end up. You had to be able to see where it would shift and how those shifts would happen. And I'm curious, like, how you did that. Was it just knowledge of the industry, or?
I mean, it involved a lot of discussions, trying many different kinds of products, looking at customer feedback, and again, understanding what strategic corporates and retailers are looking for. Obviously, then after all that, it requires a bit of a leap of faith and sort of judgment.
Right.
And that's where we came to the conclusion to invest in Abbott.
Pretty good at those leaps of faith.
Well, we don't always get it right, but when you do, it can be really powerful, particularly if you invest at such an early stage.
Correct. Agreed. And as you're again going on or continuing on with the Abbott's example, how much of your, if you were to think about a percentage, what percentage of your choice and decision to move forward would be related to the founder and the leader of the company that you're investing in?
It's always one of the most important criteria, if not the most.
Okay.
We only make perhaps 2 or 3 new investments each year, and the rest are follow-ons. And so obviously, it needs to be a great product that's differentiated. The unit economics need to be solid. It needs to be scaling, and it needs to have a great founder/team. So yeah, we were impressed by Carrie from our initial meeting, and it's been a real pleasure working with her and on this journey.
I love it. And how many companies have you invested in so far, approximately, if you don't know the exact number?
Approximately, in my capacity at Melitas Ventures, because I've invested before, about 35 companies.
It's a good number. And out of that, if you're willing to pick a couple that you really were like, hey, like these were like wow experiences for you, do you have a couple that come to mind?
Yeah, sure. I guess you mentioned one of them, but yeah, I would point out Olipop and Nom Nom as a couple of
Yeah.
examples. Um, yeah, in the case of Nom Nom, fresh human grade pet food
Hmm.
company. Speaking about themes, pet's a great space. We
Hmm.
realized that it wasn't just adults that were looking for better for you products, but you know,
The pets.
adults looking to feed their kids and
Yes.
their pets, healthier
Yep.
food. And so that move towards fresh human grade pet food is a powerful one. And I think we were early in identifying it, Nom Nom being one of the key players in the space. So it was an early investment of ours. It was the biggest investment out of our first fund. And
Yep.
yeah, fortunately, within 2.5 years, we sold the company and it, returned about 40% of our first fund. So that was a great
Really good.
outcome.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, Olipop's another example. I mean, it's
Oh
a
my
brand
God,
that,
that one's amazing.
yeah, it's been incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
I love the product. I love the brand. I'm a big fan of the team, and it's really been a privilege to be working with those guys since the very early days. I mean, we noticed that there's been a need for sort of healthy soda
Mm-hmm.
alternatives to Pepsi and Coke, but beyond that, also the move towards gut health and prebiotic soda, particularly as sort of kombucha was sort of maybe tailing off a little bit.
Maturing. Yes.
Yeah, and so we saw great potential
Mm-hmm.
for Olipop when we first invested 2019, 2020. And then fortunately after Nom Nom, we made it the biggest investment out of Fund One, Fund Two, and now it's yeah, the scale has just been phenomenal and doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon.
No, it doesn't. And Olipop, what year did you invest?
I think we formalized the first investment in January 2020.
2020. So they were just starting to go into like Sprouts and Whole Foods. And I think they had
Yeah,
spent their first 2 years, 2018, 19, just focused really smaller accounts, very
that's
regional.
right.
I mean, they were so disciplined in what they did in creating this like this best in class velocity story. And I,
Right.
and I think so many other companies I see, and maybe you have any thoughts on this, but I see people trying to go everywhere. It's like going
Right.
wide instead of deep. I feel like that they hit it out of
100%.
the ballpark going deep.
100%. And that's a common I think mistake. I mean, obviously we're generalizing, but
Hmm. Yep.
brands these days get distracted by too many different things, whether it's on social media and or with their distribution strategy. And I think often less is more. And sort of getting those, couple accounts right and demonstrating those velocities and understanding
Hmm.
what's working, what's not working, expanding from there. In fact, that was one of the things that beyond sort of the qualitative factors, we saw that the sales velocities in the accounts that they were selling were sort of
Hmm.
treble at the
Yes.
time their comps. And
Right.
that's very telling, right? With limited data.
Right. It is. And we actually have a deck that I share with emerging to mid-sized brands. And I'm like, this is the path. Because ultimately, a category manager's job is to grow their category. And so
Right.
if you can show that you're triple the normal velocity, even if you're small in dollars, but they're
Right.
seeing, like, everyone can see this because of syndicated data. It's like, well, of course you're ultimately going to win. And
Yeah.
it really, I think the other key too, it could be just 40 stores, 50
Right.
stores. It doesn't have to be 1,000. You can just prove it out in a few number of stores and then go. And I mean, they proved it.
Right. And then you see sort of a potential formula for success, right? Because I
Yep.
think at that stage, once you know it's working, then you can gradually or rapidly start putting more marketing dollars behind it and really further
Mhm.
accelerate it. And that's what Olipop's done. I mean, now
Yeah.
the velocities are, an even higher multiple.
Yep. I've noticed that many of the brands you invest in are now or headed toward omni-channel.
Yeah.
Um, Olipop, did you see that as an omni-channel opportunity, like shipping quote unquote water across the country? And is that? I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
I mean, the short answer is yes. I think the reality is that if you want to become a large brand, you have to be omni-channel. right? The question is, how do you get there?
Mm-hmm.
Some brands start DTC, other brands start retail.
Mm-hmm.
With a beverage brand, retail is sort of the more natural channel. That said, there is an opportunity to build an e-commerce business up to a certain size or proportion of the business.
Right.
And for what it's worth, like in COVID, we saw an opportunity to scale Olipop's e-commerce channel, and
Big
they
time.
did that very, very effectively.
Yeah, which is amazing if you think about the costs of making that all work.
Right.
But if you have a consumer who's willing to pay it, and you're willing,
Yeah.
especially the D2C side versus Amazon, you have that relationship with a
Right.
supercharged consumer. So, after you complete your investments, and I imagine it's different by who you're investing in, how do you like to participate with brands? Is it just at quarterly board meetings, or is it something a bit deeper?
Yeah, it's deeper than the quarterly board meetings. I mean, so our approach is that we're typically leading or co-leading. We don't have to, but that's the way it's evolved, that we take active roles in our companies, usually involves board seats. So sure, there's the quarterly meetings, but beyond that, we form, very close bonds with these founders, and, it often results in a text messaging type relationship, and
That's
we're
how you know
meeting
you're
in
close.
person. Absolutely. I mean, you want to be sort of first call for these founders, and you don't want to just get sort of the good news, or the sort of filtered news at the board meetings. You want the call when there's a recall, or when somebody leaves the company. That's particularly with all companies of all stages, but I think particularly in the early days.
Got it. And you mentioned you like to invest earlier on and get the upside. How early will you invest?
So we'll typically invest once there's initial product market fit and initial revenue traction. So it will depend on the business model and the company, but typically we want to see at least 1 to 5 million in annualized sales for that initial investment.
Got it. So that's often Series A or
Seed or Series A. I'd
Series
say
C.
there's some semantics, but
Yeah.
the real sweet spot for us is seed, like
Okay.
dose that you mentioned before. We identified it, and Medvasu, just as he was launching.
Amazing guy.
Invest,
Yes.
yeah, very, very smart operator, and we invested in the node, and then we led the seed round.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah. And okay, so you were in the note and then the seed round. Got it. So
Yeah,
you saw what you liked, and there's nothing not to like. I have 2 boxes shipped to me every month of the product because it actually works.
which product?
Soreness. I have a disease
Interesting.
called Meniere's that causes a buildup of fluid in my left ear, and I get dizzy. I used to get dizzy. That's before dose, and so about 2 years ago, I was coming back, and I was working closely with Dose at the time, and then I had some soreness, and I just took a bottle, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I felt better within 30
Wow.
minutes.
Yeah.
And so I take 2 soreness shots every single day. I travel with it. Where I travel for a week,
great.
I will have 14 bottles that I travel with.
Well,
crazy.
that's the power of dose. I mean, it actually works, right?
Yeah,
So it's
right. Right.
it's
That's the funny part.
it's a supplement, but it's efficacious, and so the company, as a result of that, and obviously very talented team and successful digital
Amazing.
marketing strategy, has built a great business. So yeah, it's been phenomenal to experience that trajectory.
Yeah, it's amazing. And what I think about like the brands you've invested in that we've talked about, like an Olipop and Abbott's and a Dose, is I think one of the themes I think of that's consistent is discipline. The leaders are very disciplined.
Yeah.
And I imagine it's one of the things you're looking for is that track record of discipline.
Absolutely. I mean, it's every founder is different, but typically, yeah, you want to see discipline, you want to see passion, you want to see somebody that has conviction, but also the humility to take feedback. And I think discipline also applies to our investment strategy, right? I mean, we've been very consistent, I think, through the past couple of cycles in terms of our focus. I don't know if that's the case for all funds in the space. I know many have shied away from consumer products into sort of consumer tech and other areas. So we've stayed focused and disciplined, and then also, on our investments. I mean, we want to support all our founders, and we do support all our founders where we can. But we have our own business too, and we've stayed disciplined as far as only investing follow-on capital behind the companies that meet or exceed milestones.
Mm-hmm. Right. There's no being sold on the dream. It needs to be on the actual metrics being achieved, and
Right.
I love it. That makes sense. And I'm curious your thoughts. If you haven't thought about it, it's okay. But I'm thinking about Walmart more and more for natural brands. It's interesting. Before I would have said Walmart would be like the last place I would want to go. Certainly want to go to Target first, and maybe even want to be in conventional throughout. But curious your thoughts. I think Walmart is itemizing in some really interesting ways. They seem to be appealing to consumers in a different demographic of consumer, or maybe expanding the demographics. I'm curious if that's come up for you at all, and if you have any thoughts on it.
It has, and several of our brands, are selling at Walmart. Walmart's built a great business, and also on the e-commerce side of things, right? So,
totally.
So absolutely, and I know Target's had some challenges recently, but
yeah.
They have done a really great job, and I think continue to do a great job of attracting some of these better for you branded products. And I know several of our brands, such as Magic Spoon, have had very positive experiences with Target.
Yeah, that's great. Magic Spoon is an interesting one too, because they really built out D2C fully
Right.
before going into retail, correct?
That's correct.
And, yeah, and then I see the shelves at Sprouts, and it's an interesting idea of going back to the omnichannel conversation before continuing the other conversation line. But it's interesting the power that Magic Spoon had walking into retail from their success that they had in a D2C environment. I mean, it's crazy. There's a change happening now where I think more and more D2C brands have opportunities in retail because of their success in D2C. Are you seeing that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there was that sort of, at least from our perspective, that initial wave of DTC brands, when we started investing, sort of call it 2018 to 2021. A big part of it was, the customer acquisition costs were lower. This was before the Apple, Facebook, iOS changes.
Mm-hmm.
And so companies like Magic Spoon, like Mudwater, like Kin Euphorics, Nom Nom were able to build scalable businesses online. And then, it got to a point where it sort of made sense to go into retail. And in the case of, Magic Spoon, they had this sort of brand cachet. They had, a very strong customer base. And so we're able to kind of get into retail in a big way.
And from day one, it felt like they walked in with that like 2 SKUs on shelf, but it was like 6, 8.
And it's been incredible. So very well executed, and that's sort of I think the ideal playbook, right? You sort of scale DTC and then launch big into retail, then become a successful omnichannel brand.
Yeah, I think I believe you can be more profitable for at least certain brands, especially if you're not shipping water all over the place, right? But in the D2C environment, and then that D2C business can help subsidize what you're doing in retail, especially in the early days. We really have to invest like crazy to be successful.
It can. I mean, it's more challenging today, I think, to start a brand DTC, particularly, a food or beverage brand, but brands with the right sort of price point, AOV, margins, yes.
Yeah, agreed. Going back to my conversation on maybe kind of interesting places to go with brands today, like I mentioned Walmart. Costco is another one. I listened to a podcast the other day. I think it's called Acquired. I don't know if you've ever listened to that one. And they did the deep dive on Costco. And I'm really blown away with Costco. And any of my brands that have gotten into Costco, I mean, it's almost like drop the mic, go home. If you get Costco nationally, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that channel.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, we have Magic Spoon does a great job at Costco as well as Amara, Baby Food Company, and others. I think you have to be ready for Costco, right? Typically, to your point, Luke, I think if you go national in Costco and it's selling well, it can be a game changer for these brands, but you really have to be ready. Because it can be very big volume. The brands might not be ready for it. The economics can be a little bit different. But ultimately, yeah, it can be very much icing on the cake once these brands are selling in different retailers and perhaps have an online presence.
Yeah, agreed. And maybe the last specific retailer to ask you about is Trader Joe's. Um, I think that one's a real interesting one, and we're often when we're approaching them being asked to do private label, and
Right.
and we had one brand. It was a plant-based milk company a few years ago where we were able to like launch there with a private label, and we never needed to raise capital again. Right? It was just we were done.
Wow.
It was just very profitable, and the cost of that channel is very low compared to others. But I'm curious your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, it's different, right? And might make sense for some brands and not for others because, typically our approach, the brands that we support, they're building their own brand. And so, maybe they'll do some private label, but it'll be a smaller portion of their sales. But to your point, if you can get kind of a great deal with a lot of scale, and be profitable, then maybe it makes sense. We haven't seen as much
Okay.
of that dynamic with Trader Joe's, but maybe that's more, the kinds of brands we invest in.
Sure. Certainly could be. And thinking you're a part of YPO, correct?
I am.
I'm curious how, and maybe the general theme of having a group of people that you can connect with, relate to. When did you join YPO? Maybe I'll explain first. YPO, Young
Sure.
Presidents Organization. It's an organization that you can join if you're a company of a certain size. A lot of it's about some only YPO experiences, but the core of it is this idea of a forum, usually 6 to 12 people who get to go deep and share really every aspect of their lives. I'm curious for you in your space, how's YPO affected you or helped you through the years?
Yeah, it's helped me more sort of evolve as a leader and a manager and thinking about scaling my own business, Melitas Ventures, which has been very impactful. And, I want to keep growing and learning as I'm helping navigate the direction of Melitas Ventures, rather than, say, opening up a
Got it.
network to
Right.
founders, or obviously it turns out you and I were both in YPO, but and maybe that's something that's untapped, but I don't know if you've experienced that differently.
Yeah, on the YPO side, the network has been helpful. If I have a question or I'm stuck on something, the
Yeah,
ability to go reach out to someone in the network
right,
means a lot. And I think to your point, I remember when I had the exit from my distribution company, it was just great to have almost like my own kind of personal board of
right,
directors that was sharing their experiences, challenging me. I've been never been challenged more than by the people in my YPO forum,
right.
but it's made me better, right? Yeah, so
Absolutely.
I think that's good. And I'm curious, what does a day in your life look like? An average day, a composite day of Alex's life.
Yeah, an average day is, I mean, I get up pretty early, I make my coffee, and then usually first thing I'm, reading different articles, newsletters, replying to emails, and then I'll begin, a combination of Zoom calls and meetings, both internally, externally, and maybe a lunch and or coffee with a founder or another investor, comparing notes on deal flow. Have board meetings here or there, and then always try to fit in some time for activity, whether it's going to the gym or going for a run. Um,
I think
and
your family's
then
been growing too, if I'm not mistaken.
my family's been growing. We have a 6-month-old son, Daniel, so
Congratulations.
that's keeping me busy as well, and it's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you mentioned kind of reading? Is it like news? I imagine articles. Do you listen to podcasts?
I do. Not so much on sort of a typical day. That's more
Okay.
kind of in the weekend or if I'm working out. But yeah, I do. I do enjoy listening to podcasts.
Is one you're comfortable sharing with my audience?
I don't know if there's one sort of specific one that comes to mind,
Okay.
but yeah.
All good. All good. Yeah, I've haven't listened to many podcasts. And then last week, someone mentioned the Acquired podcast, and I listened to
Okay.
that, and I'm like, okay, like maybe I could do more of this. I think at some point I think like, do I really want to invest an hour, hour and a half? And I'm like, well, I'm
Right.
asking people to listen to an hour of my podcast. I can listen to others as well. And I always learn something. It's like, if I can get one thing out of it, that's good.
Yeah, it's more about, I think who's speaking, right? And what's their journey? How does that resonate
Mhm.
with you? How do you learn from it? But yeah, I find that if I'm running on the treadmill or if I'm on a plane or a train,
Yeah,
it's often a
that's
great
really
time to
good.
listen to a podcast.
Yeah. I did a LinkedIn post a few weeks ago about Expo West,
Right.
and writing about how, is it critical that mid-sized brands who maybe are trying to be more mindful of their spend compared to where they were, like where the market was a few years ago. Like, I'm curious from your standpoint as, as an investor, like how important is it that brands, especially like even between that emerging to mid-size, right? How important do you see it as them for them to be at shows like Expo West?
It depends, I think, on the stage of the company and, where they are in their lifeline of, going into retail. I
Mm-hmm.
think if it's too early, it's probably too much of an expense and it's probably
Mm-hmm.
premature. But if you're at that right stage in terms of scale, you're starting to have serious retailer conversations, it can be quite impactful,
Mm-hmm.
like what we did with Abbott's last year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think you really got to pick your spots. And regardless, I think almost everyone in the industry is going to be there in some shape or form. So
Mm-hmm.
if you don't necessarily have a big booth, most of the founders are still walking the floor.
Correct. Yeah, as maybe thinking about the investor class, like where you fit in, like if you saw a brand that actually said, "Hey, we're already know everybody in the national channel. We're already we have great brokerage coverage. We're doing great, and we just don't see the $100,000 as a spend. I want to do here. I want to do it somewhere else." Like, or would you like? Are you understanding of that? Like, okay, like you don't have to.
100%. I mean, I'll tell you specifically, Olipop last year didn't have a booth.
Okay.
Olipop is a great presence among the retailers, and so didn't feel like it necessarily made sense. And obviously, the founders and the team were there, and the brand was present. Um, One of our peers felt differently, and spent a lot of money on a booth. So it all
Right.
it all depends. But I think, I think you want to get the bang for your buck when the time is right.
Mm-hmm. And I think this goes into a little bit of a deeper area. 4 years ago, from many brands, it was about claim sales at all costs. Who
Right.
cares about margin? Um, I imagine, and knowing the brands you've invested in, like I imagine for you, bottom line does matter, or at least visibility to it that you're quickly closing. And maybe some of your thoughts on the balance of the two. Like in order to be kind of that venture space, you need to be growing fast, but also you need to be doing it in a wise way relative to your managing your capital.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it's always mattered, right? The
Mm-hmm.
bottom line. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's my hedge fund background. I don't know, but like, I mean, of course,
Or common sense, right?
perhaps both. I don't know, but like, sure, we're backing high growth businesses, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we, all acknowledge that most of these businesses are not going to be profitable in the early days. But I think you want to see generally a path to profitability. And you don't want to spend money at all costs. I mean, no matter
Mm-hmm.
what the fundraising environment's like, capital's capital. And I really appreciate founders like Carrie from
Mm-hmm.
Abbott's who think about the ROI and opportunity cost on the spend. Because
Right.
if you spend 100K at, Expo, um, you know, that's 100K out of your marketing budget. Could you spend it somewhere else? Could you spend it on digital marketing or,
Mm-hmm.
a team member?
Right. Exactly. No, I agree. I think that it's been healthy, the changes I've seen, and but it's great that you were an investor that already saw that from day one. So
Right.
that's probably why you're still in this, where many of them have dropped out, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's helped, but obviously some companies do it better than others.
Yeah, agreed. I also am curious your thoughts. I'm seeing you mentioned the scenario that existed, especially when you started your fund, of the large CPG companies, and they're effectively, I think some of your ideas are like the instead of starting their own internal brands or making their current brands more natural, they kind of look at this space as being incubation, and then
Right.
the ones that succeed they can pick off. And I also see more and more of the large CPG companies now starting to, like a Reese's cups that's now clean or maybe even organic, right? And um, do you is the market changing in a way where that if effectively that competition that didn't really exist from the large CPG companies, they is going to be a bit more harsh in the environment?
I don't think there's much of a change. I think the reality is it's tough for these companies to innovate
Mm-hmm.
as well managed and large as they are. There's this notion of innovator's dilemma, right? Sort
Mm-hmm.
of, Coca-Cola needs to protect its core brand. The
Yes.
best paid employees are supporting Coca-Cola and its core brands, and they're
Right.
not going to spend a lot of time on these smaller brands, and they'll be sort of, limited patience if it doesn't go well. Of
Right.
course, there's exceptions. I mean, Pepsi did a good job with bubbly.
They did. Yeah.
And yeah, I know right now some of the larger, I guess the Cokes and Pepsis are, sort of introducing their versions of prebiotic soda. We'll see. But generally, I still think that the impetus is for these early stage brands to generally succeed, and the large players are well positioned to acquire the best performing ones.
I like that. And I think that's helpful. I also have maybe more of a theoretical question for you as it relates to the natural brands and brands that are coming up. I'm worried that consumers have a disconnect around the true value they're getting from these products, and and just the margin challenge a lot of brands have. And I know the consumers are shell shocked from inflation that happened from COVID,
Right.
but I also see a lot of the margin. Like I look at product margin of 45% or below, as being like that's the line of death. Below that, you're probably not going to be able to be profitable as a company. Do you have no line of sight to that? But then there's also the constriction of like what is a consumer really willing to pay. I don't know. I'm seeing a struggle here that I don't know how to resolve. But I'm curious if you've thought about this challenge. Like I feel like people aren't really paying many of the brands out there what their products are really worth and the value they're getting.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing from my perspective is demonstrating that value.
Mm-hmm.
I think if a consumer truly feels they're getting value from a product, they'll pay for
Mm-hmm.
it. Perhaps at a more challenging time of the cycle, they'll have to see even more value.
Right.
But I think generally speaking, consumers are willing to pay more for a healthier product and or
Mm-hmm.
a product with functionality. And I think that will continue to be the case.
Cool. That makes sense. Yeah, it's ultimately the market's the market, right?
Right.
And we're not going to change it. So,
Right.
right, emerging brand will not. Fantastic. What are you excited about in the market today? What are you seeing that gets your blood pumping?
Yeah, so there's other categories of consumer where we haven't yet seen much innovation. So an example is laundry detergent. We recently made an investment
Hmm.
in Laundry Sauce, which is a fragrance forward laundry detergent company that's done an incredible job on e-commerce and has the potential to launch in retail. So that's one of those sort of large categories with high
Right.
household penetration where we haven't seen much
Right.
innovation. So that's one, and I think generally the household cleaning product space, there have been some brands, but I think there's another wave coming. So that's an area that I'm very excited about. We are interested in fragrance as well, more
That's
broadly speaking.
going crazy right now with
It
my
is.
15-year-old.
Yeah, no, it is, and it's a different business model, right? I think from our generation, it was sort of the Tom Ford, Givaudan's, sort of high price point,
Yeah.
but now sort of thinking about evolving to kind of a lower price point, more accessible, limited edition type fragrance, and so there's a
Hmm.
few interesting businesses in the space. global multicultural foods. I think we
Yes.
saw Pepsi acquiring Siete towards the end of last
Yep.
year. I think we're going to see more of that, sort of whether it's, sort of Asian brands or Indian brands. I think the US is really opening up its palette to sort of other types of
You totally are.
multicultural brands. And I think also, when you think about supplements, and dose falls into this to the extent, sort of the
Yep.
Western and US acceptance of Eastern type medicine,
Yep.
it doesn't need to be all sort of medication and OTC. It can be food as thy medicine, sort of natural ingredients that help cure ailments, or at
Yeah.
least help ease them.
I love that. And thinking about the dose example again, like having, like mentioning that I drink two every day, like
Right.
products like that truly are efficacious, that that are not so much of the Western medicine, right?
Right.
I think it's a huge place, and because it isn't just buying it ideally once, right? Or once a week. It's
Right.
ideally something people are using ongoing, and that velocity could just be amazing at shelf.
100%. And that makes for, right. And then online, it makes for a great
Oh
business
yeah,
as well,
wild
because if
subscription
you're a
models. Yes.
subscription, then you're
Yep.
consuming it every day, or
Yeah.
more than once a day.
Yeah. I'm curious if you're thinking at all about regenerative organic or rock certification, and are you seeing that come up at all?
I haven't focused on the space. No.
Okay, cool. We just did a helped Sprouts with an innovation set that was focused on it, and I think it's the next step.
Interesting.
You're seeing organic, even in conventional and mass
Hmm.
going crazy. And it's like, what is that next step? Was it biodynamic? Is it going to be regenerative organic?
Hmm.
But regenerative organic seems to be that's going to be another big thing on the horizon coming up. So,
Interesting.
yep. So will you be at Fancy Food, and do you go to Expo, or what shows do you attend?
Yeah. So I'm at Expo West every year. I enjoy being there and seeing everybody, seeing all our brands. So
Hmm.
I'll certainly be there. Fancy foods. Sometimes my
Hmm.
partners tend to attend more than I do. Um, so yeah.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I will. I'll be at Fancy Food, and I'm seeing Fancy Food evolve a little bit more, where it
Right.
used to be very specialty, and now it's like kind of like the poor man's expo in some
Right.
ways. It's like much lower cost, and can be efficient. It's just, and you actually have conversations. I think
Right.
the challenge at expo has become more and more like it's just a lot of people in one spot, and so
It is, but I also enjoy what happens sort of around Expo, right? Sort
true.
of, I spend the week, or at least I get to kind of Santa Monica early in the week, and I tend to meet investors and founders, and then there's dinners and there's drinks. So
Yeah,
you've got to be organized and plan it well. But there's a lot of buzz I find around Expo
there
West.
is a lot of buzz. You gotta be there.
Right.
So even if the Uber trip is $100 for a couple miles, and your cell phone might not work because it's
Right.
overwhelming the systems,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's because it is popular. Right. You mentioned earlier about the team and the people you surround yourself with. How big is your team?
So we're 10 in total. So we're five full time
Wow.
and five part time, five advisors.
Okay. And in terms of the team, I'll imagine a number of analysts and um,
We probably don't have enough analysts. So if you know any good analysts,
okay.
associates, let me know.
But you're
But yeah,
also the consummate analyst yourself. Sounds
I
like.
am, and I'm very proud of that. But I can't do all the analytics these days. So I appreciate other people that I can work alongside.
I love it. I love it. I will keep my eyes open and peeled. And Alex, that was all the questions I had for you today. I'm grateful for you joining us. Thank you for sharing your experience and knowledge with my audience.
Thank you, Luke. That was a lot of fun.
Right. Fantastic. All the best. I'll see you at Expo.
Sounds great. Look forward to it.